Ever walk into a room and feel it watching you back? That strange silence, the kind that doesn't just exist. It presses against you, like the walls remember something you've forgotten. That's what Helen felt that morning. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't distracted. She was simply walking into her living room, the same one she'd walked into every morning for over 40 years. But today, the air was different, still, flat, as if something that used to breathe in this space had quietly vanished overnight. The sunlight filtered through thin, hesitant lines of curtain light, landing on the old rug in front of the fireplace. For a second, she couldn't place what was wrong. Everything looked the same: the framed wedding photo on the mantel, the vase of wilted carnations Claire had brought last weekend, the stack of folded blankets on the chair by the window. But then her eyes shifted to the far corner, and that's when she felt it. The emptiness. The space where her piano had always stood, that familiar dark shape that anchored the room, was bare. Just a pale square of carpet now, a faint outline where the legs once pressed into the fibers. Helen's breath caught, her heart stuttering in confusion. She blinked once, then again. Maybe it had been moved. Maybe Claire was cleaning. Maybe, but deep down, she knew that corner had been the heartbeat of the house, and now it was silent. Her husband, George, had bought that piano 40 years ago, not because they could afford it, but because, as he used to say, every home needs something that sings when people forget how. She could still see him, young and smiling, the day they'd walked into the old music store on Elm Street. The piano had been sitting by the window, a 1928 mahogany, Baldwin with scuffed legs and a single ivory key chipped at the corner. George had run his fingers along the keys like a man greeting an old friend. "Hear that?" he'd said, pressing a chord that filled the dusty shop with sound. "That's not an instrument, Helen. That's a promise." They'd eaten soup and crackers for a month after that, just to make the first payment. And it had been worth every spoonful. He'd play after dinner, every night, without fail. Sometimes jazz, sometimes Chopin, sometimes just whatever his hands felt like saying. Helen would hum softly from the kitchen, pretending not to notice when he changed the melody just to make her smile. That piano had seen everything: birthdays, arguments, quiet apologies. It had played through storms, long nights, and the day they got the call about George's diagnosis. And when he could no longer play, Helen kept it just as it was, his metronome still perched on the lid, his worn songbook open to autumn leaves. A few coffee stains on the pages from mornings long gone. That piano wasn't furniture, it was memory, carved into wood and wire. And now, it was gone. She froze where she stood, her breath catching like a skipped note. "Where is it?" she whispered to no one. To the room. Maybe to the ghost of George himself. Her hands trembled as she walked closer, touching the wall where it once stood. The wallpaper there was slightly darker, protected from years of sunlight, a perfect, rectangular shadow, the ghost of music that once lived here. She stood staring at it when she heard footsteps behind her. Mom, her daughter, Claire, came down the hall, holding her coffee like it was just another morning. Her voice carried that casual brightness that made Helen's stomach tighten. "Oh, the piano," Claire said, noticing where her mother was looking. "I had it picked up this morning." The words fell like cold water. Helen turned, her mouth parting, but nothing came out for a moment. "You, what?" Claire sipped her coffee. "You haven't played it in years, Mom. It was just taking up space. You said you wanted the house to feel lighter, remember?" Helen blinked hard, steadying her voice. "I meant curtains, Claire. I didn't mean him." Claire frowned. "Mom, it's a piano, not Dad." Helen felt something twist inside her. She could hear George's laughter in her mind, that warm, rolling sound that used to fill every corner of this house. And now her daughter was saying, "It's just a piano." "Where is it?" Helen asked again, her voice lower, steadier. "Who took it?" Claire sighed, setting her cup down on the mantel. "I sold it to a collector in town. He offered good money, Mom. It was a good deal." Helen felt her chest tighten, her heart pounding like the faint echo of an old chord. "You sold it," she repeated, each word brittle. Claire crossed her arms. "We could use the extra space. I'm trying to help you, Mom. You've been stuck in this house, holding on to all these old things. Dad wouldn't want that." Helen didn't answer, not right away, because she knew Claire believed that. She truly did, but Claire didn't understand that this wasn't about holding on to things. It was about holding on to him. That piano wasn't just wood and strings. It was the sound of every "good morning," every "I'm sorry," every I love you that had never been said aloud. Helen took a slow breath and turned away. She didn't want Claire to see her eyes, that glassy mix of anger and heartbreak, because no matter your age, when your child wounds you, it cuts the same way it did when they were little. Quiet, deep, unseen. The day stretched on in silence. Claire left after lunch, mumbling something about ordering new furniture. Helen didn't reply. She just sat in her chair, looking at the corner. The absence of the piano filled the room louder than music ever had. Hours passed. Shadows shifted across the carpet. The light dimmed. Helen made herself a cup of tea. She didn't drink, out of habit more than need. She caught herself humming the same way she had when George used to play, but halfway through, she stopped. The sound didn't feel right without his chords beneath it. The air in the house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. And then, as the clock ticked softly on the mantel, the phone rang. The sound startled her. She hadn't expected anyone to call this late. She hesitated, then picked up. Hello, a man's voice, calm, polite, spoke on the other end. Ma'am, is this Mrs. Helen Bennett? Yes, she said cautiously. This is Oliver from Crescent Music Shop. I believe your daughter sold us your piano this morning. Helen's heart dropped. Yes, she did. Her hand tightened around the receiver. Pause, something inside. She asked quietly. Yes, ma'am, the man said. A breath, then softer. I believe it belonged to your husband. Helen's throat closed. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She looked toward the corner again, the empty space, the shadow on the carpet. And in that moment, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt expectant. Her voice was barely a whisper. What did you find? I think it's better if you come, he said gently. You'll understand when you see it. When the call ended, Helen didn't move. She just stood there, one hand still on the receiver, her mind running through years of moments she thought she'd already lived for the last time. Somewhere, deep inside her, she felt it, the faint hum of a melody she hadn't heard in years. And as night settled around the house, Helen realized she wasn't done with the music yet, not by a long shot. What could George have left inside that piano, and why did a stranger's voice sound like someone who knew him better than she did? Helen's hand tightened around the receiver before she realized it. Her fingers trembled slightly. The cord twisted around her wrist, a thread tying her to something she wasn't ready to face. Something inside the piano, she repeated. Her voice sounded strange, small, brittle, almost younger. Yes, ma'am, the man replied. His tone was calm, polite, but careful, like he was handling something fragile. We were preparing it for delivery when we found, well, something personal. It had your husband's name inside, and I thought you should see it yourself. George's name. It had been months since she'd heard anyone else say it aloud. Months since his voice had been more than memory. More than the whisper that sometimes slipped through her dreams just before she woke. Her throat tightened. Can you hold it for me? She asked softly. Of course, he said. Take your time, Mrs. Bennett. The line went silent, and for a few seconds, she didn't move. She stayed there, standing in her own living room, receiver still pressed to her ear, the faint hum of the dial tone buzzing like a heartbeat she couldn't hang up on. When she finally lowered the phone, her hand lingered in the air. It was warm against her palm, as though the voice still lived there. She looked around the room, her living room, though at that moment, it didn't feel like hers. Everything was in its place, and yet everything had shifted. It was the kind of quiet that follows after something breaks, not loud, not noticeable to anyone else. But to her, it was deafening. That she wanted to call Claire, to ask why. But she knew how that would go. Claire would say something reasonable, something practical, something that sounded right but felt wrong. It's just a piano, Mom. And Helen would say nothing, because if she spoke, the words would come out soaked in tears. So instead, she turned toward the corner, that empty corner where George's piano had stood for half a lifetime. The rug still bore faint marks where the piano legs had stood, for small indentations pressed deep into the carpet, like footprints left behind by something that used to breathe. She knelt slowly, her knees aching, and pressed her palm to the spot. The carpet was faintly warm, though she knew it was only sunlight. Still, she let herself imagine it came from something else, from him, from the music that once filled this room, from the love that had never really left. Her fingers traced invisible lines where the edges of the piano used to rest, and as she did, memory came quietly, like a melody she hadn't realized she still remembered. She could see it, their kitchen in the old house, years ago. the smell of coffee and toast, George's laughter spilling through the hallway. He'd call out from the living room, "Come listen to this one, Helen," and she'd shout back from the sink, "You'll wake the neighbors," but secretly, she'd smile, because she loved it when he played. Loved how his fingers seemed to dance without thinking, like they knew things his heart couldn't quite say. Sometimes she'd step into the doorway, just to watch him, his hair, his brow furrowed, the little tap of his foot keeping time, and when he'd catch her watching, he'd grin and say, "Let them hear what love sounds like." That was George, always saying too much with music and never enough with words. She let the silence hold that thought, feeling it stretch softly across the years between them. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even noticed. The sound of that piano, George's joy in every key, echoed through her mind, steady and alive. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and sat there a moment longer, staring at the empty space that used to pulse with life. Her gaze shifted to the framed photo on the mantel, George sitting at the piano, his arm around her waist, his eyes still bright, even though his hands had already begun to fail him. She'd hated that photo once, thought it made him look fragile, but now she saw something she hadn't before. The way his eyes looked at her, as if he already knew he'd have to leave her something to hold when he couldn't stay. Helen stood slowly, her knees stiff, and took the photo down. She held it close, running her thumb over the glass. "I wasn't ready, George," she whispered. "You went and left me with too much silence." The words hung in the air. The clock ticked softly on the mantel, the only sound brave enough to exist. When she finally set the photo back down, she turned toward the window. Outside, the light was fading, lavender and gray spreading across the sky. For the first time since the call, she felt something stir beneath the ache, a small, steady flicker of curiosity. What could they have found inside the piano? A forgotten note, a receipt, maybe a sheet of music George tucked away without thinking. No, Oliver's voice had been different, careful, almost reverent. Whatever it wasn't trivial. Helen crossed the room slowly, her steps soft and measured. When she reached the front door, she stopped. Her reflection looked back at her in the glass, hair silver, eyes tired but steady. She saw the woman George used to call his rhythm, the one who hummed in the kitchen when he played, the one who didn't need words to understand his heart. "All right, George," she whispered, "I'm coming." She reached for her old wool coat, the one from his last recital, and slipped it on. It still smelled faintly of cedar and perfume, like it had absorbed the years instead of letting them fade. When she opened the door, the air outside was cool and alive, carrying the scent of rain and jasmine from the neighbor's fence, the kind of air that wakes you up, even when your heart feels heavy. She stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath her feet. For a moment, she just stood there, looking out at the quiet street, the lamplight stretching long shadows across the pavement. The world looked exactly the same, and yet it wasn't. Something had shifted. George's world, his music, his secrets, all of it had just opened its door again. Helen locked the door behind her, her hand resting on the knob a moment longer. It wasn't just a lock turning. It felt like a chapter closing, and another, unexpected one waiting to begin. She stepped off the porch, coat brushing her knees as she walked toward the car. Her movements were slow, but certain. As she drove down the narrow road, the streetlights flickered on one by one, little dots of light leading her forward. The radio stayed off. She didn't need it. The only sound she wanted was George's melody in her head, soft and steady, guiding her like it always had. By the time she reached the corner where Crescent Music Shop stood, a small brick building with golden lettering glowing against the twilight, her pulse had steadied. She parked and sat there a moment, hands resting on the wheel. Through the window, the shop's faint amber light glowed like a promise. Somewhere inside that building was a piece of George, something he'd left behind, intentionally or not. She wasn't sure what she'd find, only that for the first time in years, she was moving toward something. And though she couldn't explain why, it felt like George was leading her there. What could George have hidden inside that piano, and why did the man at the shop sound as if the past wasn't finished with her yet? The bell above the door chimed softly as Helen stepped inside Crescent Music Shop. It was a small place, narrower than she expected, tucked between an antique bookstore and a bakery that smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain. The kind of shop you could walk past 100 times without noticing, until life gave you a reason to look closer. Inside, the air felt thick with age, cedar polish, Ross oil, and something faintly sweet, old sheet music. Maybe drifted through the room. A gentle melody played somewhere in the background, not from speakers, but an old phonograph near the counter. Its sound fuzzy at the edges, like an echo from another life. Helen paused just inside, letting her eyes adjust. The light was dim and golden, coming from a few old lamps with tasseled shades. It made everything look softer, safer. Behind the counter stood a man with kind, tired eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen a lot of partings. He wiped his hands on a cloth, then looked up. Double quotes Mrs. Bennet. She nodded. You must be Oliver. I'm glad you came, he said quietly. Her fingers tightened around her handbag strap. You called about my husband's piano. He inclined his head and gestured toward the back. Yes, Mom, it's right this way. The floorboards creaked under her shoes. Each step sounded louder than it should have in the hush. They passed rows of violins, trumpets, and music stands. Their polished surfaces caught bits of light and tiny reflections of her face, trembling slightly in brass curves. She whispered, George would have loved this place. Oliver smiled over his shoulder. He must have been a player then. Oh, he was, she murmured. Played until the last month he could. Even then, he'd sit and hum, tapping his finger like a metronome. Those are the ones who never stop hearing it. Oliver said. They reached the far corner, and there it was, George's piano. It sat beneath a cone of warm light. The dust had been wiped away. Mahogany gleamed faintly, its curved body catching every hint of gold. Her breath caught. Oh, George! The name slipped out before she could stop it. Oliver stayed quiet. She stepped forward. The air around the piano was different, cooler, still. Listening, her fingers brushed the lid, smooth, cold, waiting. For a heartbeat she saw him there, young again, leaning over the keys, smiling when she joined in on the melody. Rain tapping the windows, his laugh tumbling through every note. Then her fingertips paused. The left side of the keyboard cover was slightly ajar. A narrow shadow of paper peeked through. What's this? She whispered. Oliver knelt beside the piano. That's what I called you about. When we moved it, we heard something slide inside, thought it might be a sheet of music. He reached for the counter, picked up a clear sleeve, and held it out carefully. But we found this wedged between the frame and the soundboard. Inside lay a weathered envelope, sealed and waxed. Helen's breath trembled. On the front, in handwriting she knew as well as her own heartbeat, were 2 words, for Helen. Her knees weakened. She lowered herself onto the bench, the envelope trembling in her hands. She traced the faint grooves of the wax. He left this there. Seems that way, Oliver said gently. Must have been hidden for years. Did you open it? He shook his head. No, ma'am, it wasn't mine to open. Her eyes filled. Thank you. He nodded once, then stepped back to give her room. She sat there a long while, the quiet of the shop wrapped around her. Varnish and old paper. The scent of time itself. Paused. The scent of time itself. She breathed it in, eyes closed. It smelled like memory, like coffee on Sunday mornings, like the echo of laughter in another room. And she could almost hear George's laugh, that soft, guilty one he used whenever he was hiding something sweet. What have you done, George? She whispered. Why would he hide a letter where no one was supposed to find it unless he wanted it found later? Her mind began to turn. A confession, a goodbye he couldn't say aloud, or a song. George had always told her letters were too final. Words can trap feelings, he'd say. Music lets them breathe. If he'd written something down, it meant he needed her to hear it. And somehow, he'd known this was the only way she would. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time didn't move the same inside that shop. Oliver pretended to sort sheet music, giving her the dignity of solitude. When he looked up again, his expression was gentle. Take your time, he said quietly. Helen smiled faintly. I'm afraid that's all I have left. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The record near the counter had stopped. Silence held its breath with her. At last, she stood. She placed her hand on the piano's lid. The wood reflected her faintly, a face lined with grief, and something else, anticipation. She turned to Oliver. May I take this? She asked, holding up the letter. Of course, it belongs to you. She slipped it carefully into her purse. At the door, she turned once more. The piano sat quiet, radiant under the light. It almost seemed to glow, as if George's spirit were still there, waiting. Thank you, Oliver, she said softly, for not letting it go unseen. Helen sat in her car outside Crescent Music Shop, the letter unopened in her hands. The world had gone gray. Rain fell in thin, steady lines against the windshield, tapping softly, gentle at first, then steadier, until it sounded almost like a metronome. keeping time with her heart. She traced the edge of the envelope, her thumb catching the ridges of George's handwriting. Even through the paper, it felt alive. That familiar curve on the H, the little tilt he always gave his letters as though they leaned toward her. She turned the envelope over, again and again, stalling. Part of her was afraid to open it, because once she did, it would become real. Whatever George had left behind would step out of memory and back into her life. She thought of the notes he used to leave her in their younger days. Little slips tucked into recipe books, coat pockets, under her teacup. Meet me by the river at 6, or you're still the best thing that ever happened to jazz. This envelope, though, this was different. Hidden inside his piano, his most sacred place. She looked down at the wax seal. All right, my love, she whispered. Asterisk. She took a slow breath and broke the seal. The soft crack of wax filled the car louder than it should have. Inside lay a single folded page, delicate, creased, faintly yellow. She unfolded it carefully, the paper whispering like it had waited years to speak. George's handwriting danced across the page, confident, looping, uneven where his illness had touched his hand. She could almost hear his voice in the curve of each word. She began to read. My dearest Helen, if you're holding this, then the piano has found new hands, and my secret has found its way back to you. Do you remember the first time I played for you in that tiny apartment? You said you fell in love with the way I looked at the keys. But it wasn't the music, Helen. It was you. You were the song I was trying to find. That piano became my journal, my way of saying everything I never knew how to speak aloud. There's something I kept from you. Love. When I was diagnosed, before I told you, I wrote a melody. One I never played for anyone. I called it Helen's Song. It's hidden inside the piano's memory roll. If you play it, you'll hear what I couldn't say. Every note is a moment I wanted to keep with you. Every pause, a breath I wish I could still take beside you. I didn't leave this letter to make you sad. I left it so you'd remember something. When the music stops for one of us, it doesn't mean the song is over. It just changes hands. So play it, Helen. And when you do, don't cry for me. Just listen, and you'll know I'm still there, in every note. All my love, George. Her hands shook. She lowered the page into her lap. Outside, the rain softened, blurring the world beyond the glass into soft, shifting watercolor. Streetlights shimmered, bending through the water like they too were remembering. She pressed the page to her heart. His song, she whispered. He had a song. Tears welled, slow, heavy, and kind. The kind that fall from love too large to fit inside a single lifetime. For the first time since he'd gone, she didn't fight the ache. She let it move through her, steady as the rain. She traced his handwriting again, following each curve like a path. The ink was faded, but the lines still pulsed with life. He hadn't written this to say goodbye. He'd written it to bring her back. His voice echoed softly in memory. Music doesn't die, Helen. It just waits for someone to play it again. A quiet, trembling laugh escaped her lips. You old fool, asterisk, she murmured. You knew I'd find it. She leaned her head back, eyes closing, letting the sound of rain fill the silence. Flashes came, fragments of decades folded into melody. George's hands guiding hers at Middlesea, his laughter when they played duets badly on purpose. The hum of the piano through the floorboards late at night when she'd fall asleep to his rhythm. It all came rushing back, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. Asterisk, the rain eased, slowed. Asterisk, asterisk, she read the final line again. When the music stops for one of us, it doesn't mean the song is over. It just changes hands. Her throat tightened. The song changes hands, she whispered. Was he telling her to move on, to keep living? Or was he asking her to finish what he started? She turned her gaze toward the shop window. Through the mist, Oliver was still inside, sweeping the floor, unaware of the revelation sitting just beyond his glass door. She looked back down at the letter. The ink glimmered faintly, alive with the reflection of her car's dashlight. George's words felt like a pulse, a heartbeat made of music and memory. She folded the paper carefully, tracing the old creases, and slid it back into its envelope. Then she turned the key in the ignition. The wipers squeaked once, twice, clearing arcs of glass, giving her narrow glimpses of the street ahead. She didn't drive home, not yet. She turned toward the hill, toward the park that overlooked the city, the place they used to go after his gigs, where the wind carried faint strains of music from the open-air cafe below. When she reached the overlook, she parked. The world below shimmered through the thinning rain, lights flickering like tiny candles in the distance. She sat there for a long moment, the letter resting in her lap, and whispered, "You said the song changes hands, George, so what do I do now?" No answer, just rain tapping the roof, steady and rhythmic. But she could feel him there in the quiet, in the pulse of the world around her. She unfolded the letter again. This time she read aloud, slowly, softly, her breath sinking with the rhythm of the rain. When she reached play it, Helen, her voice trembled. She smiled through tears. "I will," she whispered. "I will." She kissed the edge of the paper and set it gently on the passenger seat, unwilling to fold him away again. Lightning flickered across the clouds, one quick, white heartbeat of light that illuminated the car. She smiled faintly. "That's your cue, isn't it?" The rain tapered to a whisper. She started the car, turned toward home. The drive was slow, quiet, almost reverent. Each streetlight flickered like an old metronome, marking her way home. By the time she turned onto her street, the rain had stopped completely. The air was new again, washed, clean, alive. She parked in front of her house, headlights cutting across the garden path. The glow from her window spilled through the curtains, golden and steady. Like a waiting stage light, she sat for a long time, listening to the quiet, and then, softly, she said, "All right, my love, I'll play it, I'll listen." She gathered the letter in both hands and stepped out into the night. The air was cool and damp. The world smelled like rain and possibility. And somewhere, faint and far away, she could almost hear it, the first soft hum of a melody waiting to begin. What would Helen hear when she finally pressed those keys? And what truth had George left waiting in the melody he could never say aloud? The next morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered through soft gray clouds, spilling across wet pavement and puddles that shimmered like tiny mirrors. The world looked washed and new, as if the night had rinsed it clean. Helen stood at her doorway for a long time before she left. Her coat buttoned high, the letter folded neatly inside her pocket. She ran her thumb along its edge through the fabric, still needing to feel it there, like a small heartbeat pressed close. The drive felt shorter this time, not because the distance had changed, but because she had. Yesterday, she'd gone there out of shock, out of longing. Today, she went because of something else, purpose. When she parked, the air smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked wood, the kind of smell that makes you think of Sundays and second chances. Inside, the bell chimed softly. Oliver looked up from the counter. He didn't speak, only nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement that words weren't necessary. His hands rested respectfully at his sides, like a man at church. Helen crossed the shop slowly, her shoes brushing against the worn floorboards. She didn't rush. She'd learned that from George, that music and healing both come at their own pace. The piano was waiting in the same place, beneath the soft cone of light. Only this time, it didn't look lonely. It looked ready. Helen stepped closer and laid her hand on the polished wood. The surface was cool, but it didn't feel distant anymore. It felt alive, like it had been holding its breath for her. She exhaled softly. "Good morning, George," she whispered. Oliver smiled faintly from behind her, but stayed silent. Helen crouched and ran her fingers along the underside of the keyboard cover. Her hand brushed against a small metal latch, then the smooth cylinder of the piano's memory roll. She hesitated a single heartbeat before releasing it. The metal felt cold against her skin. Oliver stepped forward quietly. "May I?" She nodded. "Please." Together they fitted the roll into place. The gears clicked softly, like old bones remembering how to move. Helen stood back, her hand trembling just above the keys. "Take your time," Oliver said quietly. "I've waited long enough," she replied, almost smiling. Her fingers hovered, then pressed the first key. A single note rose, low, trembling, uncertain, and hung in the air like a held breath. Then another joined it, and another. The melody unfolded, slow and fragile, like morning light, soft and patient, creeping through curtains. It was his song, George's song, and it sounded like him, not just his music, but his spirit. Each note was tender, hesitant, afraid to disturb the quiet, yet, beneath that softness was strength, a quiet conviction, a pulse that refused to fade. Helen closed her eyes. With each measure, she could feel it, a memory hiding inside every note. The soft thump of George's foot when he kept rhythm, the low hum he used to make when he forgot she was listening, the way he'd always pause right before the melody turned hopeful, giving her a chance to breathe before life began again. She let the sound wash over her. The music rose and fell gently, breathing in time with her. Between each phrase were tiny silences, small pauses that felt like sighs, breaths of love, places where words would have been, if George had ever been the kind of man who spoke them easily. It was beautiful and unbearably human. Oliver stood quietly at the back of the shop, his eyes lowered. Even he seemed afraid to move, as though one wrong sound might break the spell. Helen could feel her heart sinking with the rhythm, slow, steady, certain. And then, halfway through the melody, came something unexpected, a key change. The shift was subtle, but it opened the room like sunlight through stained glass. The notes brightened, lifted. The melody bloomed into something freer, bolder, like George had been saving his last bit of courage for this. Tears slipped down Helen's cheeks. Unnoticed, she could see him now sitting right there beside her, grinning softly, saying, "Don't rush, love, the music knows where it's going." She smiled through her tears. "I know," she whispered, "I can hear you." The melody lingered, then began its descent, slow, deliberate, graceful. Each chord fell like a curtain closing gently after the final act of a long, beautiful play. When the last note came, it didn't end abruptly. It drifted, hung there, slowly fading until it became part of the air itself. Then silence, the kind that heals. Helen sat with her hands still resting on the keys. Her breath came unevenly, a quiet mix of peace and grief, all tangled together. Oliver finally spoke, his voice hushed. "It's a beautiful song," she nodded. "It's him saying goodbye." Her voice caught on the word, and she smiled faintly, the only way he knew how, without words. For a moment, neither of them moved. The light in the shop seemed to hum quietly in place of sound. Helen looked down at the keys, at the faint smudge her tears had left behind. She didn't wipe it away. Instead, she placed her palm flat over it, feeling the faint warmth still left in the wood. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a messenger, a bridge. Her fingers lingered on the lid, and for a fleeting second, she could swear she felt something move beneath her hand, not physically, but in the way the world sometimes stirs when your heart finally lets go. Oliver stepped closer, his voice soft. "He must have loved you very much." Helen looked up at him, eyes glistening. "He still does." He nodded, saying nothing more. She stood slowly, her knees stiff but steady. The air around her felt lighter, almost buoyant. For the first time since George's passing, she didn't feel like she was walking through silence. She was walking through music. She turned toward the door, pausing only once. Her gaze fell back to the piano, still shining faintly in the morning light. She smiled. "Thank you, George," she whispered, "for finding a way to stay." As she walked toward the exit, Oliver called after her gently. "Mrs. Bennet," she turned. "Would you like me to keep it here?" The piano. Helen thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's already where it belongs." Oliver understood. He didn't ask again. She opened the door. The bell above it chimed one last time, its tone clear and pure. Outside, sunlight spilled across the wet street, scattering in little puddles of gold. She stepped into it, her reflection blurring in the water. Each step felt new, in time again. When she reached her car, she paused and looked back through the window of the shop. Inside, the piano sat bathed in soft light, still, waiting. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full, alive, with all the things George had said without words. She smiled. Then she placed her hand on the car door, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I heard you, love. I really did." And in that bright, still morning, Helen finally let go, not of George, but of the grief that had kept her from hearing him for so long. Helen thought the music had ended, but the truth was, it had only changed instruments, and now, the melody was hers to carry. If this story touched something inside you, take a breath, let the quiet sit beside you, because sometimes, silence is where the heart finally speaks. We rush so much, don't we? To fill the quiet. To move past the ache. To pretend we're fine when something deep inside us still whispers otherwise. But maybe that silence isn't empty. Maybe it's waiting the way. Helen's piano waited. Still, patient, listening. Maybe you have your own Helen moment. A song that stops you mid-sentence. A photograph curling at the edges, tucked in a drawer, a letter folded neatly in an old jewelry box, or maybe something smaller, the smell of morning coffee, a sweater still hanging in the closet, a laugh that lives only in memory. Whatever it is, it's yours, and it's proof that love doesn't vanish just because time has passed. You see, Helen thought her story was about losing something, but what she really found was that love doesn't fade. It transforms. It becomes quieter, gentler, harder to see, but it's still there, humming beneath everything. Maybe that's why George left his song hidden, not to be found right away, but to wait until she was ready to hear again. And maybe you have something like that too, a melody, a memory, a voice from someone you miss, still waiting to be heard. If you do, don't rush it. When you're ready, open it, hold it, let yourself feel it. It's okay to cry. That's not weakness. That's love, remembering how to breathe. Because love doesn't end when people do. It doesn't stop when the music fades. It changes hands. Just like George said, it becomes something you carry in the rhythm of your days, in the way you tell their stories, in the quiet moments when no one else is around and you still talk to them out loud. Maybe that's what love really is. Not sound, not memory, but a rhythm that keeps beating quietly inside us, even when everything else has gone still. Helen's story reminds us of that. Truth. Goodbyes don't have to be endings. Sometimes they're beginnings we don't yet understand. Sometimes they're invitations to listen again, to feel again, to remember differently. And maybe that's what you needed tonight. Not closure, but connection. Even now, even after all this time, the people we've loved still reach us. Through songs, through dreams, through small, unexplainable moments that remind us were loved deeply once, and maybe still are. So if this story stayed with you, thank you for listening. If it reminded you of someone you've loved and lost, share it with them or for them. Light a candle. Play a song. Tell someone their story. Never know who might need to hear it tonight. Maybe someone you love is still waiting for a song of their own to be played again. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me, for sitting with Helen's story, for letting her melody find its way into your quiet. Because every time you listen, every time you let yourself feel, you keep these stories alive. You keep love alive. And if your heart feels a little heavier right now, pause 1/2 sec. That's okay. That's how you know it's working. It means something inside you heard the music and remembered how to listen. Before you go. If you want to hear another story that speaks to that same tender place, a story about memory, family, and what it means to be brave in the small moments, go watch my last story. It's called When My Daughter-in-Law Told Me, I'm Selling Your Car. I responded in a way she never expected. It's another reminder that even when life changes, even when people forget the weight of what came before, there's always a way to stand your ground with grace and to love without letting go of yourself. So maybe, after this story ends, go there next. Let that story keep you company tonight. And if this one, Helen's story, found you at the right time, then maybe that's no accident. Maybe it's your heart's way of saying, the song isn't over yet. Thank you for spending these moments with me, for listening, for remembering, for still believing that stories and hearts can heal. Until next time, hold on to what truly matters, let go of what keeps you from living, and don't forget to listen. Because love is still playing softly somewhere, just waiting for you to hear it again. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.